This is A Different Perspective with Kevin Randle. A retired U.S. Lieutenant Colonel, Kevin Randle has been studying UFOs for nearly 50 years. Kevin has investigated some of the most famous UFO cases in the world and has been consulted for dozens of documentaries about UFOs. Considered one of the leading experts into the Roswell UFO crash of 1947, Kevin has written more than 25 books about UFOs, including the recently published Roswell in the 21st Century. Now, here is the host of A Different Perspective, Kevin Randle.
And welcome to this edition of A Different Perspective. I am, in fact, Kevin Randle. Before we start officially, I'm going to mention the passing of Dr. Bruce Maccabee just recently. Bruce was one of the, leading lights of the UFO investigations. He was a Navy physicist. He was well encompassed in the scientific method. He brought literally science into the realm of UFO investigations. He was responsible for massive FOIA requests, including some documents from the FBI that proved to be quite illuminating. And I think in one of his FOIA dumps, the Hoover memo came about, which was the Army had requested the assistance of the FBI in investigating basically the backgrounds of UFO witnesses. And the letter had a note on it from Hoover, said that he would do this as long as the Army granted them access to all crash recovered debris. And in the LA case, which I think is Louisiana, the Army had grabbed it and taken off with it without letting them see it. He was a member of the major UFO organizations, MUFON, CUFOS, and FUFO. He was on the board of directors, I believe, at the Fund for UFO Research, FUFO, and contributed a great deal to the credibility of the whole phenomenon with his research and his abilities. And I think he's going to be greatly missed by the UFO community. I'm going to bring on the guest, Ryan Wood, here. And Ryan, you had some, would you like to say some comments about the passing of Dr. Maccabee?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, he was the shining light of scientific method. His work in the Navy and optical, he had a PhD in physics. He did a lot of work on this 1978 New Zealand case, as well as the Rendlesham Forest case. I agree, his work on getting FOIA documents. I mean, I'd love to, spend time with his library of data. I don't know if his wife has it now or where is it. Yes, he attended one of our crash retrieval conferences, I think 2004, and gave a talk about the El Indio Guerrero 1953, I think, crash. And I had supplied him with some White House phone records that showed that the White House switchboard was abuzz on that date compared to normal environments. So, yes, I mean, very much a wonderful man and helped me along the way. And I'm sure he had a good relationship with my father as well, Dr. Bob Wood. I should ask Bob what he remembers about Bruce.
Well, the other thing I should have mentioned, I did an interview with him a number of years ago on this program, and if you go to my blog, kevinrandle.blogspot.com, you can listen to our discussion about UFOs and the things that he had investigated. I think that while I think all of us disagree on certain cases periodically, and it's only inevitable that will happen, but I think that he always presented a cogent, intelligent argument for his position, whatever it might have been. So he's one of those that will be greatly missed by the UFO community. And I hope that the latest round of congressional investigations, they at least tried to tap into that source of information before he passed. I think the other thing, I'll check with David Muller, who's putting together the UFO archives in Albuquerque, and see if there's any arrangements there, or if there's been any contact, because his files, I'm sure, would be just extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me of
moving along. As you know, my guest is Robert. Oh,
I mean, it reminds me of Stanton Friedman and
go ahead.
Bequeathing of his files to university in Canada for their archive and so forth. So I hope that Bruce's estate does that too.
I think. Well, I was going to say, I think the one thing I've been contacted by David Muller as well, and I'm just wondering if the thing to do there, I'm going to take some of the records down to him when I visit Roswell this summer, is for him to copy, and then either give me the copies and keep the originals, or give me the originals back, because my research isn't over, and at the end I can give everything to him when I finish with the research. Let me introduce officially Ryan S. Wood, as you can see on there. He was born in Maryland in 1955, and I'm not going to hold that against him. He was first interested in UFOs when his father, Dr. Robert Wood, was engaged in deciphering the physics of UFOs while managing a research project on anti-gravity for McDonnell Douglas. In 1978, he graduated from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, that's a long name, with degrees in mathematics and computer science. Ryan is now regarded as the leading authority on top secret classified Majestic 12 intelligence documents, and in the 1941 Cape Girardeau, Missouri UFO crash, among other things. He is the author of Majic Eyes Only in a recently updated version, and he's got another book out, which I do not have written down on my notes here. So yeah, I'm sure he'll let us know what it is when we get a chance. He's a frequent lecturer on UFO subject. He has taught college courses and made numerous presentations about UFOs to civic organizations and at ufology conferences. He has organized 7 worldwide UFO crash retrieval symposia, and I actually was at one of those, and has presented a UFO lecture to a class on national security affairs at the Naval Postgraduate School that formed the basis of their final exam. He has appeared on many documentaries and radio shows. He continues to manage the content of majesticdocuments.com, and along with his father, Dr. Robert Woods, was the executive producer of a television documentary on the authenticity of Majestic 12 called The Secret. Welcome to A Different Perspective, Ryan S. Wood.
Thanks so much, Kevin, and thank you for your continued work in the field of ufology and UFO research.
I think we all need to get that thanks, but thank you very much. I got a copy of your new book, or the updated version of Majic Eyes Only, which is a compendium of crash retrieval informations. I had said recently that I believed I was the leading authority in the United States on crash retrievals, and then was looking at your book and thought maybe I spoke too soon. But then I thought, no, we can make Ryan the leading authority on international, worldwide crash retrievals as well, and I can keep my little place there. I said that in lieu of Len Stringfield, of course, who turned us all on to this idea of crash retrievals.
Yeah, I mean, by all means, I'm standing on the shoulders of Len Stringfield's work and so many other investigators who have specialized in crashes. I'm not an expert in Roswell. You are, or Kecksburg, or Shag Harbor, or many other crashes all over the world. And I just tried to pull them together and give people a synthesis of many different cases with references and details. Some are more authentic than others in my mind. And I just want to present the broad swath of evidence.
Well, here's a question that is rather trivial. How many cases do you examine in the book?
Well,
do you have any idea?
Yes, there's 104 crashes reviewed and discussed. The original 2005 book I had 74 crashes, and I just wanted to get the book done and out, and I left 3 or 4 more on my desk. So, and I suspect that there's more. We've over-selected for English-speaking countries in Europe and UK and US. We don't have good visibility into Russia or China or Africa. And I suspect the true number is probably in modern times, since the 1800s to present, more like 200 or 250.
Well, I know in my book, Crash When UFOs Fall from the Sky, there are 118 crashes reviewed, and I know this number because somebody in writing the review said there are 118 crashes revealed in this book. And many of them, although we lace them in books about crashes, I think are probably not UFO crashes. They're other things. I think, for example, there are some listed in my book, at least, that came from Project Moondust. And it seems that the 1 or 2 of those may have not been anything off-world, but something that was more terrestrially based. So I went in that direction, but I think, and I noticed that some of the cases that you talk about in your book, I talked about in mine, and we disagree on the conclusions there. And we'll get into that in just a moment. And I say just a moment because I'm coming up on a break here, and I don't want to get something started interestingly before we can get into that. I will mention this, that we need to talk about Trinity, of course, which is Jacques Vallée's book about a crash in San Antonio, New Mexico in 1945, although the original date was 1947 for that crash. And I think we need to talk about, Aurora, Texas. Ubatuba, you mentioned in your book, and you give the date of September 1957. And I don't know if you caught it in some of the discussions with Jacques Vallée that he labels it in the early 1930s now. He said that the dates were wrong on that, which changes the complexion of the story significantly. And I was surprised by that as well. I listed it the same as you did in 1957. And maybe we'll get into the Tunguska event and Kingman and Maury Island and some of these other cases I don't think are as well researched or have the same level, the same amount of evidence, I suppose. A lot of them I know from your book and my book were single witness cases or cases that came from military documents. Spitsbergen Island, for example, came from military documents, but I think it's well established in today's environment that that was a hoax created back in the early 1950s. And if you can get to the earliest documents on that, you find that out. Although it did generate classified traffic through the Air Force in 1952, which gave it a legitimacy that it may not have deserved. Anyway, I'm here with Ryan Wood. His book is called Majic Eyes Only. It's updated, as we've just talked about, with many more cases available. My Roswell book, the latest one, is Understanding Roswell, and the mentioned before, Roswell in the 21st Century. I think it updates a lot of that material. So we'll be back right after this to talk about UFO crash retrieval. So stick around.
Are you interested in evolving with the times and becoming all you can be? Don't you wish there was one place to find the latest information to help guide you through the process? I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, host of Mission Evolution Radio TV. Join me on my mission to find the latest evolutionary knowledge and tools. The guests on Mission Evolution are leading experts in a wide variety of divergent topics, including allopathic, holistic, and integrative medicine, epigenetics, enlightenment, quantum physics, meditative practices, environmental issues, spiritual evolution, trauma healing, and so much more. Mission Evolution Radio TV is aired worldwide through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, X-Zone TV Channel 32 on Simul TV. You can enjoy our archives of radio or TV shows with our compliments at www.missionevolution.org. Come see the amazing lineup of guests and topics. With more than 200 episodes to choose from, you're sure to find what you're looking for. Visit www.missionevolution.org. www.missionevolution.org.
And I am here with Ryan Wood. We're talking about crash retrievals, or we will be talking about those in just a moment here. Once again, if you're interested in the Roswell case, I think the book Understanding Roswell gives you kind of a different perspective on the case. It goes into depth into the backgrounds of some of the important witnesses that hadn't really been reported on before. And I think that gives it a sort of a different well, as I said, a different perspective. And it also exposes, I think, some of those who were, shall we say, less than candid in their stories. And I'm thinking of Glenn Dennis and Jim Ragsdale, for example, Frank Kaufman, who were less than candid in what they talked about. Yeah, I have a list of the crashes that are mentioned in your book that I found interesting as well. And I thought about doing it in chronological order. And then I decided, no, I don't want to do that. It's too much trouble. So we'll start off. The big one is Trinity, which was the book that Jacques Vallée and Paula Harris published a couple of years ago and have updated several times. And it's the story of two young New Mexican boys who saw the crash retrieval and have talked about it and provided a lot of information for it to Dr. Vallée and Harris. What did you think of that case? Where did you come down on that case?
Well, originally in 2005, I gave it sort of a neutral rating, and since then, I've lowered the rating based on the work of Doug Johnson. I mean, Ramey Baca was one of the witnesses there, and I invited him to a crash retrieval conference to stand up and give a presentation about, his firsthand experience. And had his plane tickets on the schedule. He sent me his slides and so forth. But, at the last minute, he was a no-show and sort of canceled his appearance. And I ended up giving, a brief talk about his slides. And then Doug Johnson, who's sort of a lawyer in Washington, D.C., sort of dug in and did a lot of interviews and research around Jose Padilla and Ramey Baca, and looked at me, looked at many other sources, the Mountain Mail article that originally kicked it off, and convinced me that I'm putting too much stock in this story, and I think that it, despite Paula Harris's diligence and Jacques Vallée's participation and their new book and so forth, I've reduced its credibility in the latest edition of my book.
Well, I had talked to both Sandra Friedman and Don Schmidt about this. And both of them said that Ramey had come to chat with them and was talking about it being in July of 1947 at the same time as the Roswell crash. And there were things in their discussions with him that suggested that the information he was providing might not be credible. And I know Tom Carey had a taped interview with him, which he shared with Doug Johnson, which you can listen to at Doug Johnson's website. Where it became clear that Ramey was more interested in how to cash in on it than on the facts, and a lot of the information seemed to be borrowed from the Roswell crash. For those of you interested, these were two boys who were out in the New Mexico desert, supposedly watching cattle on their ranches, and saw this thing crash and rode over to the area and watched the military retrieval operation, and then it had an opportunity to get close to it and claim they went up inside the craft. I looked at it from a military perspective, and the timing of it is right after the dropping of the atomic bomb on New Mexico, as I like to say, at the Trinity site. And the military response made absolutely no sense to me. I mean, we're still in the Second World War. We're still fighting with the Japanese. They have attempted to bomb the United States and actually succeeded in it, killing 6 civilians in Oregon with what was called balloon bombs, which is a whole nother story. And so they find this vehicle this craft that they didn't know really what it was. And they entered the retrieval operation. And then one afternoon, they decided to all go off to lunch, leaving it unguarded. And that's when they got up, Ramey and Via got up inside of it. I just didn't buy that at all when I got to that point.
Yeah.
So with Stan Friedman, with Don Schmidt, with Tom Carey, I just really paid no attention to it until Jacques Vallée got involved.
Yeah, I might add that Tim Good, famous British author of Above Top Secret and many other books, they're well done and have stood the test of time. They interviewed Ramey Baca and paid for a scientific analysis of the aluminum part that Ramey had, and he wanted to use it in his book, but Ramey said no, and that sort of pissed him off. And so that's just another little check mark about, I'm not sure this guy is credible, believable, and honest. So I agree with your assessment.
I think Timothy Good is probably glad now that he didn't get permission to use it in his book.
Right.
But to be fair, I mean, we all who write books and continue the research may have believed in a case at one point and learned that it was not credible. And at another point, maybe a case we didn't think was credible turned out to have much more documentation than we thought. So we have to keep reevaluating the whole the whole field periodically to make sure we haven't made some kind of a tactical error. But for me, Trinity is a non-starter. The witnesses were not credible. They said they picked up a whole lot of this foil-like material, I think that maybe Bill Brazel had mentioned, and they used it for tinsel on their Christmas trees. And of course, all of it has disappeared now, so we can't have any analysis of it. But I mean, things like that just didn't work out. In that book, and this is a nice way to transition, by the way, in that book, Vallée talks about the Aurora, Texas case. Give us a little bit of background about that and where you come down on that case in today's environment. Yeah,
well, the foreword was written by Jim Mars in my book Majic Eyes Only, the original, and I kept it again. And he was a lead investigator on the Aurora, Texas 1897 event, so to speak. What was interesting is that in the Majestic documents, there's a mention of, we're going to research all the way back to the 1897 Texas case. I think it might have said Aurora, Texas, but it said Texas. There's a historical marker at the site. The basic story is that a rancher heard or saw a UFO crash into his weather vane. Yeah, right.
Judge Proctor.
Proctor, yeah. And he sort of cleaned it all up and pushed it down as well, according to the story, and gave the alien a proper burial in the local cemetery. There was a gravestone provided there with a sort of a triangular shape inscription on it. There's some pictures of the headstone and the site. Later on, not quite sure when, the headstone disappears and the alleged parts that were confirmed with a metal detector by one witness disappeared and were dug up, presumably by the military or MJ-12 or interested citizens. I don't know. But that's the basis of the story. There's a fair amount of radiation damage to Proctor's hands and so forth. So it's interesting in that you got a newspaper, you got a decent investigation, you've got some parts, you got some physical evidence, and I find that just the basic hallmarks of a crash retrieval. And What more would you might add to the story?
Well, having been there long before, not that long, I lived in Texas in the early 1970s, and I went out and investigated and walked the area. A number of the townspeople were involved in cleaning up the debris as well, according to the story, and they talked about it. The problem is there were 2 books written about Wise County, auroras in Wise County, Texas, in the decade that followed the 1897 crash. I was at the Wise County Historical Society, and neither one of them mentioned a thing about it, which I thought was kind of suspicious. The other thing is there was a guy that I interviewed at the time, and his hands were very deformed by arthritis. And I talked to him, and he had been alive in 1897. This, like I said, the early 1970s. So he was easily, you know, in his late 70s, early 80s. And he said nothing happened there. Later on in documentaries, you'll see the same guy with his gnarled hands saying, yes, he remembered the whole thing. So I was kind of turned off by this case. I went to the cemetery. If you go to my blog, there's actually pictures of the cemetery prior to all the interest by other people. And I'm not sure if I was actually the first guy to get there to investigate it. I know the guy out of Hayden Hughes out of Oklahoma City got there fairly early as well. And he worked with some people. I know Mufon was there and excavated the well of Judge Proctor and found basically snakes. Not a whole lot of interesting debris and that sort of thing. So I kind of pass on that one. So I think we're kind of at a different point based on where our research took us.
Yeah, I think I don't know what the authenticity rating. I had it as a high. Maybe I need to turn it back a little bit. You certainly seem to have more wealth of understanding of what happened. I was sort of relying on Jim Mars's perspective on this, but
well, and I would say legitimately, I mean, you came at it from a different direction than I did, and I was actually physically there. And talking to, I had the opportunity to talk to some of the people who were there at the time the event took place. So, yeah, I'm not sure it's a very good case, but it's a very interesting case.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is sort of the nature of crash retrievals. It's trying to determine precisely when and precisely where these things happened and get some hard corroborating evidence. And that's the, you know, I would welcome your editing of my chapter on that event, because you know a lot about it, and I relied on Jim Mars and others.
Well, and that's the one thing that I do. I call it chasing footnotes. So you read a book and there's a footnote about where the information come, and I go to that source and see what it says. And if it's got a footnote, I go to the next source and the next source until I get to the original source. And sometimes what's said in the original document doesn't exactly match what's being reported by everybody else. So an awful lot of the authors, and I know you do your research in depth as well, don't do that. They read it somewhere and they just copy it, and they don't bother to try to verify that information. So that's something we'll take a look at in the next segment, which is coming up just about now. So please stick around.
Welcome to Haunted Indian River County by Larry Lawson. Indian River County is an idyllic vacation spot on Florida's east coast, not far south of Cape Canaveral. Known as part of the state's famed Treasure Coast, many are unaware of the deep and fascinating history this area played in the development of the Sunshine State. Also lost among its visitors and residents are the chilling stories of the hauntings that accompany this rich history. It is here that a man named Waldo still looks after his family and properties 6 decades after his death. Or a retired preacher is seen digging up his hidden treasure days after he died. Larry Lawson spent more than 40 years in the law enforcement and criminal justice education profession. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Nova Southeastern University and a master's degree in public administration from Troy State University. He serves on the board of directors of the Indian River County Historical Society, is the director of the Florida Bureau of Paranormal Investigation, and is the owner of Indian River Hauntings, LLC, where he provides historical and paranormal tours and events. He has been actively researching the history and paranormal legends of the Treasure Coast of Florida since 2010. Larry is currently the host of Paranormal Stakeout radio TV show on the Exozone Broadcast Network and the past host of Encounters with the Other Side on WPSL Radio in Fort Pierce, Florida. Pre-order your copy of Haunted Indian River County by Larry Lawson on Amazon.com today.
And we are back with Ryan Wood. We're talking about crash retrievals and finding areas where we agree and disagree. And I think that we're, providing some good information from all perspectives here. I mean, you've gathered an awful lot from investigators who believe a crash may have happened. I've done the same thing, and we've also looked at the other side of the coin, where the evidence didn't really take us where we wanted to go, which brought up the idea of chasing footnotes. And to that extent, I know in your book you talk about the Del Rio crash with Robert Willingham. Tell us a little bit about what you have learned about that case.
Well, I think this is one Bruce that did a lot of work on, Bruce Maccabee, which you started with the intro on. But what I did is, when I was at the Truman Presidential Library, or I can't remember where I was, but I had the White House switchboard records for that particular date and time, and looked at who was calling who. I could look that up. I gave it to Bruce, and back in those days, they had the wires that went to each socket to connect people, and the admins or the secretaries would literally type, who called who into a log, and the time it was connected. So you heard when it was connected, and there was a lot of increased traffic around that time. So that was sort of circumstantial evidence that something was afoot then, as well as I think wasn't it the Eisenhower briefing document that had the original mention of this event?
Yes.
And
they called it El Indio Guerrero.
El Indio Guerrero, yeah, right. And the Eisenhower briefing document, which Stan Friedman championed and looked at for quite a bit for authenticity. And my father found a couple more sources provided copies that were different subtly from the original undeveloped Tri-X film that was mailed to Jamie Chandray in Los Angeles in 1984. Was it 84 or 87?
I think it was 84.
84, yeah.
I think it was 84.
84. And that launched a lot of interest in, the whole subject of leaked documents, and was sort of the first document to leak into the scene. And continuing on that theme, then the next major event was the Special Operations Manual in 1994, mailed to Don Berliner, postmarked Bliss Cross, Wisconsin, which is, in my opinion, one of the most stunning and authentic field manuals on how to recover crashed UFOs and how to create a cover story, where to ship the parts, the bodies, etc. And that's all on the specialoperationsmanual.com website.
Well, did you rely a great deal on Robert Willingham's information that he supplied to, I guess, Todd Zeckel originally, and his affidavit?
I think it's mentioned in
Willingham
the
being the Air
footnote.
Force. Well, what I'm getting at here is, and I mentioned following the footnotes, when I was doing Crash When UFOs Fall from the Sky, and I'd done an earlier book called A History of UFO Crashes, and the Del Rio case was featured in there with the information from Colonel Robert Willingham. And as I was putting together the Crash book, which was like 15 years later, I thought, what's new in the world of this case? And I began looking it up and came across Robert Willingham, who we had the affidavit. I think Don Schmidt sent me a audio clip from the record that UFOs had created back in the time with Robert Willingham talking about it. And I know Noah Torres, and I'm sure you know that, and Robert, can't remember Yarte's first name, Alexandro Yarte's book on the other Roswell relied a great deal on Willingham's information. So I learned that they hadn't bothered to check his records, and I could find no evidence that anybody else did. So I tried to check his records, and what I came up was he was not a colonel, fighter pilot. He had been a low-ranking enlisted man who technically was a veteran of World War II. He signed up for the Army in December of 1945, and the war wasn't declared officially over until the middle of 1946. So anybody who served up into that in that period was considered a veteran of World War II. But he had spent 13 months in the Army, rose to the rank of E4, I think it was, which is fairly low enlisted grade, was not a colonel. The pictures they had of him in uniform were pictures of him in a Civil Air Patrol uniform. And if you blew up the pictures, you could actually see the Civil Air Patrol insignia rather than the Air Force insignia. And when I checked his record, I couldn't find anything else about him. And yet he claimed to have retired as a colonel. And I think that kind of
it's a problem.
Destroys his involvement.
Yeah. Did you get his National Personnel Records file from St. Louis?
I got the parts that were, at that time, they considered everybody information. A number of years ago, the reason I'm stumbling around here, I got to kind of got to explain this. A number of years ago, you could write to St. Louis and they would send you an awful lot of data. Then the Privacy Act was passed and they limited it to what was considered public information. I got the public information. In the Air Force, there was also, was it the Air Personnel Reserve Center, Air Reserve Personnel Center, but it was in Denver at the time. And I contacted a number of people there about it. His record should be there, and they could find absolutely nothing that suggested he had been in the Air Force. He had not been a fighter pilot. I had an opportunity to talk to a number of fighter pilots about the story that he was injured, badly injured, and couldn't fly fighters anymore because of the problems. So he was transferred to the reserve, and then they could fly fighters again. And I talked to him, and he said, no, the problem is if you're injured and can no longer handle the stresses of ejection, you cannot transfer into the reserve and stay as a fighter pilot. So, I mean, a lot of his story collapsed in that method. And unfortunately, a lot of the Del Rio case is based on what he said. Len Stringfield, in his first monograph on UFO crashes, had the date as 1948, I believe it was. Then it became 1950, that linked into the documents you were talking about from December of 1950. And I think that's what Bruce Maccabee found and kind of tied it in there. And later on, when I talked to Willingham, he said, no, it was 1954 or 55. And so it kind of makes makes it problematic because the original witness is not as credible as it could have been.
You know, researching crash retrievals is a very challenging process. It takes a lot of time and money and focus to follow up on lots of different leads to sort the truth out. And, you know, if anything, my book highlights how under-investigated. I mean, I think half the crashes are sort of, or 2/3 are in the neutral position, which means that they're longing for more research to move the needle of authenticity one way or the other towards, you know, hoax or towards genuineness. And it just takes somebody to focus on it.
I think one of the problems is, you know, a lot of people weren't aware of the research, the military witnesses that come forward. You can find out a lot about them through the record centers you mentioned in St. Louis. And I know that Len spoke with Willingham a number of times. Todd Zeckel spoke with him a number of times. I spoke to him, I think, once. Noah Torrey and Alexandro had interviewed him at great length, and I think there were clues there that they just didn't catch. I happened to be lucky because as a child I had been in the Civil Air Patrol, so I recognized the uniform immediately. And it's an official Air Force uniform. The distinctive insignia on the lapels is different. It says CAP instead of US, and there's a metal plaque that they wore that says Civil Air Patrol Auxiliary of the United States Air Force. But that's the real point. We have to do that on our own. And we have to spend our money traveling to these places, finding the witnesses, and trying to put together the best case we can. And sometimes we get fooled. I'll freely admit, I believe Frank Kaufman for a decade. And here was a guy who was telling wonderful stories about his involvement in the Roswell case and his being a member of the 9, who were the official guys running the crash retrieval in Roswell. I believed his story right up until the time it blew up in my face. So I understand all of that, and it's something that I think a lot of people do not understand. And I've mentioned some of the highlighted cases that I found interesting that you and I could discuss, suggesting that, you know, there's a dichotomy of where we go and there's other information out there, and we should look at all of that information. I try to, in my books, when I put in footnotes, I try to put information from both sides if I've come across that information. And sometimes you don't come across it, or sometimes it's clear the information is unreliable, and you really don't want to point somebody to a place where they're going to get caught up in that. I think when we come back in just a few minutes here, I think we need to talk about some of the good cases, like Kecksburg and Shag Harbor, specifically Shag Harbor, which I think is a wonderful case with a lot of documentation, and talk a little bit about your research into that case. And this was an object that was seen by multiple people, could have been investigated by the Condon Committee because it happened on their watch. And they said, no, it was just a bunch of teenagers having a good time, and they blew it off. And here was a chance for them to actually investigate a crash retrieval and get some very good information. And I think that's one of the cases we need to kind of talk about as well, because it takes us in that direction. And then if we have some time left, maybe we can talk a little bit about Ubatuba or Kecksburg. I mean, Ubatuba has physical evidence that is quite controversial, as you well know.
Yeah, I mean, I love that magnesium part.
Yes, and the investigation and the analysis that the Air Force conducted, and the Lorenzens from APRO conducted, and Peter Sturrock conducted, brings it into a much stronger place. So we will talk about those. I'm kind of stretching here because we're almost out of time in this segment, and I wanted to have a little bit of time to talk about these other good cases that we might have wanted to talk about. I also want to mention, for my own benefit, I've done a great book on Levelland, cleverly called Levelland, which deals with the Levelland sightings of 1957. I've done a book on Socorro called Contact in the Desert that deals with the Lonnie Zamora sighting, which is a very good case with physical evidence and all of that. Not a crash, but a landing as opposed to that. So we'll get into some of that when we come back in just a few minutes. So please stick around.
Are you ready for a tale that will leave you on the edge of your seat? Get ready to dive into the gripping memoir by Bart Sibrel titled Moon Man. Bart Sibrel takes you on a heart-pounding journey, unmasking the truth behind America's famous Apollo missions. Prepare yourself for hair-raising encounters with agents from the U.S. government's top secret agencies. In Moon Man, Sibrel fearlessly reveals his real-life espionage adventures, shining a light on one of the CIA's best-kept secrets. Brace yourself for shocking revelations, including Sibrel's discovery of privately recorded audio exposing an Apollo astronaut's chilling plot, a plot orchestrated by the CIA. That's right. As Sibrel unveils this groundbreaking evidence, it becomes clear that there is much more to the Apollo missions than meets the eye. Could it be that we've been deceived all along? Moon Man is a gripping page-turner that challenges everything you thought you knew. It's a mind-bending journey into the unknown, where the line between truth and fiction becomes blurred. Don't miss this opportunity to uncover the secrets hidden for decades. Let your curiosity guide you as you join Bart Sibrel on his quest to find the truth. Moon Man, available now at Sibrel.com. That's Sibrel.com. Prepare to have your beliefs shaken to the very core.
I am joined by Ryan S. Wood. We've been talking UFO crashes, and I think we've delved a little bit into the cases that are controversial, as opposed to the ones I think that both of us kind of accept. Kecksburg or Shag Harbor, where would you like to go?
Well, let's start with Kecksburg.
Okay.
This is the work of
Stan Gordon.
Stan Gordon, right? Yeah, and actually, although I didn't write it in the book, I actually did some remote viewing, of not me personally, but hired other people, about the film. I mean, the basic story is that there's this acorn-shaped object that comes down into the Kecksburg area, and that a newspaper reporter was there and was taking pictures, and the area was cordoned off. There was a few other witnesses, and the military came and retrieved it and shoot everybody out. And I think that Leslie Kean did some FOIA requests to NASA about this particular event as well. Is there any major things that I'm leaving out?
Well, it's just I think one of the interesting things is the symbology that was around the base of the object, the acorn-shaped object, and it was I think it was a radio reporter who was there taking information, and he produced a documentary a few days later, called "Object in the Woods." And he had some of the people on. Now, according to his story, just before they went on the air with his documentary, a number of people called and wanted to back out because of possibility of someone suggesting maybe it wasn't the wisest thing to talk about. There were multiple witnesses. The trees showed damage where the object supposedly came down. And the thing was spirited away to Lockbourne Air Force Base, I think, in the western part of Pennsylvania or eastern part of Ohio, in that area. So there were a number of witnesses who saw the object in the air and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I remember doing some research about that radio person, and I actually found that he was in California, and I think I had some email correspondence with him, but he died mysteriously on the Ventura High, or the California 101 in Ventura, in his Volkswagen bus. Allegedly, some drunk driver, or he was drunk and crashed and was killed. And when I went to the coroner to get the report, They provided the coroner's report to me, but they failed to do the blood alcohol testing, and it was so old that they the coroner couldn't explain why they hadn't done it. And actually, the remote viewing said it was a murder and not a drunk. And then also that this is all speculation, that he actually palmed some of the film off, and they didn't take it all from him, and that it's still out there. I'd have to go read my report again. But anyway, that's just another lead about this particular case. But what's interesting in my mind is that the hieroglyphics around and the acorn shape, and the fact that the military was clearly there and there's good support and witnesses. What was your take?
That was an important point, that the military did respond, and there was talk of armed personnel there. In a normal circumstance such as that, I don't understand why they would have been armed if it was something normal or mundane. If they were in fact armed, then that suggests a higher level of security was around there. The other thing is, they were talking about them coming, the men coming from the Air Force as opposed to Army. And I think if you're a civilian and you see somebody in fatigues, you immediately assume it's Army as opposed to something else. And the Army and the Air Force basically wore the same kind of fatigue uniform at that time. So it would have, the fact that civilians were talking about Army personnel doesn't really mean they were Army. They could well have been Air Force. And as you mentioned, there were some witnesses who came forward. There was a discussion of it might have been a meteor, a bolide that was seen crossing there, and there was a bolide meteor fall in that general time frame, which could be confusing as well. So it's an interesting case, and I know Stan Gordon has done an awful lot of work on that and gathered an awful lot of information about it. And I know he talks about it on his anomalies, UFO anomalies zone, or his website. Can provide an awful lot of information.
I had to touch base with him again. I haven't been in touch with him. I'm just sort of re-emerging into ufology after raising kids and being busy with work.
I know how that works.
Yeah, exactly.
Life sometimes impacts your research, and that's why it's always good to go back and visit some of the cases you've looked at before. I am not an advocate for cattle mutilations, for example. I think there's terrestrial explanations for that. I periodically go back and revisit that to make sure I haven't been led astray by some of the information I had, and there's other information that's out there that maybe would push it back into kind of a non-terrestrial or an off-world connotation. So I'm a big believer in Linda Moulton Howe's Alien Harvest books, and just seeing the testimony that there seems to be mutilations. The question is, are the ETs doing it, or how's it being done? But I don't want to go down a sidetrack of that. I mean, I was going to call you on that one. We don't need to go down that. Shag Harbor.
Shag Harbor.
A good case.
Yeah.
With a photograph.
Yeah. Well, I like the fact that there's lots of multicolored lights and lots of witnesses. I think it was the husband, the wife, and the kids all saw it. It was, fairly large, and it was close visually, only 500 feet above the ground, and fairly big, like 60 feet or so. So I like that. I like that case, and I think I gave it a fairly high rating. I give it a high rating.
Let me say this: for Shag Harbor, it was seen to fall into Shag Harbor, and
right?
There was surface disturbance, and it sank to the bottom. I think of it more as a emergency landing type thing, but the U.S. Navy responded. Chris Stiles and Don Ledger found documentation from the Canadian government. Clearly something happened there, kind of like Roswell. Something happened there. And now it's the discussion of what exactly it was. But it's a very interesting case. There was a photograph of the object in the air before it crashed. I mentioned the Condon Committee because in 1968, when this took place, they were in the midst of their investigations and they had received a call. Jim Lorenzen may have been the one that alerted them to it, or it may have been somebody else. But they learned about that, and the first witnesses that were mentioned were 4 teenagers who'd seen the object, and they had searched for a telephone and finally called in. They didn't bother to check with the Mounties who were involved. Didn't bother to check with any of the other witnesses. They didn't do any of that sort of thing, which I think the excuse was it would have cost too much, and it was in Canada anyway, so it doesn't really count. So, but I think that's a very, very good case.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody's gotten the RCMP files or done the FOIA request for the RCMP files. You had to be a Canadian citizen to do that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, I think Chris Stiles and Don Ledger have done that. Don Ledger did a book called, I think, Dark Object or Dark Skies, Dark Object, which is about the case. And I know I saw a presentation by Chris Stiles who showed a lot of the documentation that he had received and a list of the witnesses, high-ranking military witnesses and police officials who were involved in the case as well.
Yeah.
We're going to run out of time here, and I want to do something first. I of course mentioned, and we've talked about Majic, your book, Majic Eyes Only.
Right.
You mentioned another book just before we began here. That book is, please don't hold it up. That doesn't work. Just tell us the name, please. Oh yeah,
it's called The AI Ufologist, for artificial intelligence ufologist, and this was last November. I was doing work for my business, Electric Fusion Systems, and using artificial intelligence to analyze hundreds of papers on science papers. And I decided, well, why don't I train it on a bunch of UFO books? And so I did that. And then I asked it the first question of, what's the ET agenda? And was impressed with the quality of the answer and the 14 points that it created. And I knew most of them, but the few that I forgot. And then I asked it tougher questions. And it continued for the next 2 days. I was mesmerized by the questions that I wanted to ask it, sort of the 30 big questions people have about ufology. But I got increasingly complicated, like why are they hiding it, hiding the secret? How do you balance transparency and the need for disclosure or secrecy, really? How's China involved? What are crop circles about? It was a mix of, why do they abduct humans? And I found it to be a very fascinating, interesting book. I'll send you a copy, Kevin, because it's very different from any other ufological.
And then we can do this again with.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and a book that I probably won't be as familiar with the information in it as you would be, and be a little another direction to go in a conversation. We're just about out of time. Ryan, I want to thank you for taking an hour out of your busy schedule to chat with us today. And I hope I wasn't too mean in asking the specific questions, but I thought it would be a more interesting show if we talked about some of the controversial cases, because Roswell, I think, is extraterrestrial, off-world. That's my opinion. I think you would agree with that. So I thought it'd be a little bit more interesting to talk about some of the cases that we might have divergent opinions and provide people with a desire to find out which one of us was right. I believe they'll find out I was right all the time, but that's just me. So once again, thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate you taking your time.
Thank you again, Kevin.
You have a good day. Thank you very much. Okay. Once again, for those of you interested, my latest science fiction novel has just come out. It's called The Interplanetary Defense Force. It's available on Amazon. It's a science fiction novel. There may be some references to UFOs in it. I don't know, remember exactly what I wrote. Anyway, we'll be back next week with another guest. So thank you for tuning in.